So I don't know if this is just because I have less time than I used to, or if my years of browsing the internet melted my brain, but more often than not, if I reach a point in a game that fails to hold on to my attention, I just kind of stop playing it. Which is why it's so fascinating to me that The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, a game focused on non-linearity and rarely telling the player what to do, which by all accounts should be the least attention-grabbing in its series, managed to captivate me in the way that it did. I'm not going to pretend it has the greatest open-world map ever made. At least 50% of the content scattered throughout it is a duplicate of something you've already done, just in a different location. But the way you can interact with everything, from the animals, to the trees, to the grass, starting forest fires, whatever this is. I don't even know what's happening here. It allowed its players to connect to the world in a way that we hadn't really seen before. Getting from point A to point B isn't just a matter of holding forward on your controller and watching your character walk to the waypoint on a map. It's a central component of this game's DNA. Mountain climbing is like a mini-game where you have to strike a delicate balance between taking your time to conserve your stamina or searching for the next resting point and using a burst of energy to get you there faster. And when it rains, you simply fall off. And die. Horseback riding is the fastest way to travel, and you can outrun just about any enemy if you're unprepared for an encounter, but it limits you to the well-trodden paths and forces you to abandon your relative safety net if you want to explore the more interesting regions of Hyrule. It stops being about the destination and starts being about the journey, which admittedly doesn't click with everybody. You can say what you will about the content of the map in Breath of the Wild, but you can't deny that in 2017, it set the new standard for establishing a meaningful connection to its players with its environments. In 2018, we saw the release of Red Dead Redemption 2, a game which took no inspiration from Breath of the Wild because its development started 8 years prior to its release, and it's incredibly obvious why it took so long. It is, without question, the most realistic rendition of a video game map I have ever seen, and I think it'll stay that way for a very long time. There are dozens of YouTube videos going into detail on all the detail in this game, so I won't spend too much time on it, but this map is one that demands to be seen. And Rockstar knew this, because with as enormous as the game's world is, fast travel, where you pick a point on a map and you just instantly show up there, while it exists, it is intentionally made inconvenient to use, because they really want you to spend your time exploring the world and seeing all there is to see. They even streamlined it in a way so that if you have a destination that's on the other side of the map, you can just hop on your horse, hold down a button, and the game plays itself with these really cool cinematic camera angles while you go to the other room to make a sandwich. So, is this fun?
Really?
Look, I know this isn't exactly a hot take. Kind of seems like it's a requirement for every video essayist to mention, hey guys, did you know that Red Dead Redemption 2's open world traversal is actually very boring?
Wow, he did it! Wow, he did it! About an incredibly popular game that everybody has already talked about 5 years ago. Wow, he's such a good YouTuber. I will support him on patreon.com/camwing at the $2 a month tier.
Shut up. By all other metrics, this game is fantastic, but I think the Velma Game Dinky said it best.
It's important to look at your game and say, okay, 50% of this is riding a horse, 25% is storytelling and cutscenes, and 25% is shootouts. Is riding the horse really the best part of our game?
Alright, now before we dig too deep into this, we should probably take a step back and figure out what actually makes a game's world count as an open one. In terms of game design, openness generally refers to a focus on non-linearity. What you do next is a suggestion, not a rigid requirement. Super Mario World for the SNES is the very definition of a linear experience. The game takes place on a literal line, and when you beat a level, you go to the next one. A game like Super Mario 64 is decidedly more open, where depending on how you approach it, you've got a number of options. Every level has a set number of stars. When you collect one of them, you're usually booted right out of the level. You can jump right back in and grab the next one, or you can head over to one of the other levels and pick one of the options there. Your only blocker to progression is the number of stars you have, which means at the beginning of your playthrough, you always have to pick the same first level as everybody else. But from that point forward, you've got options. There's still a line to follow in the form of making the small number become a big number, but the shape of that line is ultimately up to the player. By definition, that's what makes the design of this game non-linear. The reason we don't consider Mario 64 to be open world is that none of the maps bleed together. In order to get from one to the other, you have to travel through Peach's castle as a hub. Bowser's Fury is more or less what would happen if you took the design philosophy of Mario 64, removed the hub, and stuck everything in one big, seamless, interconnected map. These platforming sections still have their own very Mario-esque names, but instead of being segmented behind entrances and exits, all you gotta do to find the next destination is just look for it. Hey, I found it! Each section has its own independent collectibles, so they're still pretty analogous to the paintings in Mario 64, but with the boundaries removed, the non-linear gameplay style turns into... I mean, look at it. It's an open world. And that's really all that open world game design boils down to, which is why I wanted to use Bowser's Fury as kind of a benchmark. The content of the map is still segmented off into what could arguably still be described as levels, but they're placed in a way that allows you to access them whenever you want. So, that brings us to the entire point of this video. How do we get Mario from here all the way to here? But most importantly, how do we do it in a way that's like, you know, actually fun? Well, the Skyrim approach would be to walk there. You just kind of look at the marker on your compass, point your character in that direction, and go. If I wanted to get there faster, I can hop on a horse, and now I'm just holding the go forward button, but now I'm on a horse. The map is filled with interesting things to do, but controlling your character is not one of those things. Nintendo's approach is much more Nintendo-y, and it's one that they seem to be particularly fond of, which is sticking you on the back of a brightly colored dinosaur. As you collect more cat shines, in case you needed a reminder that this game is Japanese, additional levels start sprouting up across the map. They could just stick them all right next to each other and cut this guy out entirely, but the space between the levels almost serve as a level on their own. There are plenty of little challenges scattered across the ocean with secrets to find along the way that help keep things interesting, and on top of that, controlling this guy is pretty dang fun. I never thought that cartoon dinosaur that swims so fast he can drift like a race car would be a thing that exists, but I'm glad it does. On top of that, going off jumps and smashing through enemies and obstacles as you travel in between the zones is just perfection. Bowser's Fury is a relatively basic open-world game, because at its core, you're still collecting items to unlock new levels, and that's not a bad thing. This game is fantastic. It's just a spin on a tried-and-true formula that I think works particularly well. Adding interesting traversal in between the levels does change things up a bit, but you're still using Plessie as a means to navigate the space between the bulk of the game's actual content. Subnautica handles things quite a bit differently, where you're still collecting items that enable you to travel further, but traversal between regions of the map comprises the majority of the gameplay loop. And I know I already complained about how much travel there is in Red Dead 2 and Skyrim, but it works really well here, I promise. Within the opening minutes, you're tossed into the ocean of an alien planet, and you're going to spend about 90% of the game figuring out how to navigate it while avoiding the many things that want to kill you. And because you're underwater, your locomotion options aren't really limited to any particular direction. You're able to swim basically anywhere. Now, you might not know this, but if you try breathing underwater, you'll probably die. It's true. You should try it sometime. Hey, cut out the part where I told the audience to kill. Subnautica uses this both as a mechanic to increase tension, where gathering resources becomes a constant battle against a slowly decreasing time limit, and as a method of gating your progression, where you're only able to dive as deeply as your oxygen levels will allow. So it's critical to take into account the time it'll take to swim back to the surface, which is one of the two methods to keep your oxygen topped off at the beginning of the game. The second of which being these little air bubbles you'll find in specific locations, though their placement is scarce and you really can't count on them being anywhere. Central to this game's design is locating resources to craft new tools and upgrades to existing ones. This allows you to increase your oxygen tank, which enables deeper diving, which grants access to new materials that you can only find at certain depths, which enables even more upgrades until you start crafting tools that increase your speed, and eventually allow you to build vehicles. All in the name of enabling exploration.
Welcome aboard, Captain.
When you first get started, it might feel like all you're doing is collecting shiny rocks, but what makes this game so compelling is how exploration enables further exploration. It's all about stepping outside of your comfort zone. Because the only way to progress is to intentionally put yourself into increasingly dangerous situations. I can't think of any other game that so tightly integrates every single one of its mechanics in the name of moving throughout the world. The depth you're allowed to dive is one of the central metrics by which the game gauges your progress, and you'll very quickly discover that there comes a point where the only way forward is down. And the deeper you get, the riskier and riskier it becomes. Your starter vehicle can only handle so much water pressure until it's crushed, so at almost every point in your progression, the only way to move forward is to keep upgrading what you already have and keep looking for the materials you need to build something better. But it doesn't matter how good your vehicle is, there is always a bigger fish, and you can count on it being exactly where you don't want it to be. The brilliance of Subnautica's design is the way it constantly cycles between making you finally feel equipped to deal with a new situation, only to make it abundantly clear that you do not belong there. Speaking of people who don't belong in a place, Just Cause 3 is a game about Rico Rodriguez, a Mexican race car driver who was recruited by the agency to serve as a dictator removal specialist. His training as a professional driver explains why he can do this, and his training as an agent explains why he can do this.
Like that didn't hurt.
The core gameplay loop centers around liberating the island nation of Medici from a dictatorial occupation, which requires you to spend a lot of your time traveling across the enormous map in search of military bases. To liberate. Part of what makes this game so fun is that you aren't really ever told what to do. Story missions can only be played in a particular order, but the way you unlock them is by liberating a sufficient percentage of the region you're in, which...
Oh, sorry about that.
Yeah, you're the good guy. Any vehicle that you see is yours. And they're the fastest way to travel by far, but they are not what makes this game so special. Rico has a grappling hook that allows you to attach him to virtually anything that you can see and rip towards it at high speed. This allows you to seamlessly transition into a wingsuit and becomes one of the most efficient and satisfying ways to travel a short distance. You can get some pretty impressive height with this thing, and the best part about it is, so long as you time yourself well enough, you can immediately deploy a parachute to negate whatever fall damage you were going to take. The designers take advantage of this to take combat off the ground and put it into the air, which, man, they found a real good way to do that. The Sky Heist DLC adds a jetpack with a rocket launcher. The whole name of the game is just about blowing stuff up for fun, which this upgrade adds in spades. That might get a little stale for some people, but my idiot brain really latched onto it. I've got well over 100 hours of gameplay on Steam, and a big part of that is just because of how satisfying it is to navigate across the world. The sequel, Just Cause 4, has a mission structure that's much less flexible, and the story actually seems to take itself seriously for some reason, which is really stupid when the gameplay is this.
Yes.
But they took all the traversal mechanics of Just Cause 3, added more tools to your sandbox arsenal,
Love being outside.
and then they gave him a hoverboard. So when you're using a jetpack wingsuit to slingshot around a tornado, you can land behind a car on the highway and go hoverboard skiing to top it all off. This whole series is insanely stupid, and I freaking love it. If we ever get an official Iron Man game that's like, good, can we please have Avalanche Studios make it? Marvel seems to be on a pretty decent streak with high-quality games lately, and if they get the right teams involved, I really think it could be something special. And that's exactly what happened when PlayStation Studios partnered with Insomniac Games to make Marvel's Spider-Man. The game. It's just called Marvel's Spider-Man. I always colloquially referred to it as Spider-Man PS4, but then it was ported to PC, so do we still call it Spider-Man PS4? Whatever. The game is fantastic. I talked very briefly in my last video about open world fatigue, but for the uninitiated, what it boils down to is you've got a big map full of objective markers. I'll be using Horizon Zero Dawn in this example because I think it really suffers from this problem. These are all of the places you'll go in the main quest, which is what the developers put the majority of their efforts into. These are all the story beats, the cinematic set pieces. They're the part of the game that you paid for, really. And this is what it looks like when your map is completely filled out. Half of it is just finding something, or talking to a person who tells you to go find something. None of this necessarily negates all of the hard work and effort that went into the main bulk of the story, but structurally it serves as filler in between the stuff you actually want to do. Horizon Zero Dawn is a really interesting example of a game that I've never finished, because you'd think it would be immediately gripping. You're a caveman lady fighting robot dinosaurs. I mean, what's not to love? But that's really only what the game is when you're exploring the open world. When you follow the story missions, it mostly ends up being stealth infiltrations against human enemies, talking to NPCs and watching cutscenes. It's like the open world half and the linear narrative half are two separate games attached to each other. I really wish there was a stronger sense of connective tissue bringing these two ideas together. Marvel's Spider-Man partially suffers from the open world problem. Did they really have to just call it Spider-Man? Seriously, where did they get off titling it like that? They could have called it Spider-Man Devil's Breath or something. Sorry, this has just always really bugged me. Open world traversal. I mean, look, you play as Spider-Man. Just watch this. So yes, Spider-Man has a pretty decently sized open world map that's dotted with objective markers, and you'll be spending the entire game zipping across it and checking them off your list. But the reason this works is because it doesn't really matter what you're doing. Controlling Spider-Man is exactly as satisfying as it looks, and the combat is just as engaging as well. These aren't the deepest systems I've ever seen, and they don't have to be. They're just fun. And at the end of the day, isn't that all you really want from a Spider-Man game? Horizon Zero Dawn feels like the open world is almost at odds with its story. A story which by all means is some genuinely great science fiction writing, but it never really feels like it's part of the game. The way they want you to connect with the world is by dropping objective markers on the other side of it and making you travel all the way over there. In my last video, there's a part where I mentioned how Breath of the Wild works by giving you general directions to head, but the path from point A to point B is filled with distractions along the way. So why doesn't that approach work in Horizon Zero Dawn? Well, the combat is really freaking good. But the bulk of it is ultimately optional. The rootin' tootin' robot dinosaur shooting isn't really integrated into the main story missions in a way that makes it feel like they're equivalent experiences. And this is not an issue in Spider-Man. The things you do in the open world are almost always what you do in the story, except when you play as Mary Jane. Please do not put this in Spider-Man 2. The standalone expansion, Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales, gets a huge upgrade in the gameplay department. In addition to Miles' bioelectricity powers, which let you launch yourself a few feet higher in the middle of a swing, or shoot yourself forward for an instant boost of speed, his animations just feel so much more, whimsical? In the base game, Peter could perform some really basic tricks, but they felt kind of rigid. Miles, on the other hand, can do all sorts of stunts as you swing through the city, and you're even actively encouraged to do so because it's one of the easiest ways to fill up your bioelectricity meter, which makes moving throughout the world feel so much more fun and experimental. Also, you can do this, which is wonderful. Peter swings with the tight athleticism of a trained acrobat who's been doing what he does for the past 10 years, whereas Miles only recently gained his powers, so yeah, he's got less experience, but he's also clearly enjoying himself. His animations are brimming with this sense of exaggerated swagger, and it really does make you feel like you're controlling two distinct characters instead of the same guy in a different costume. I'm very excited for Spider-Man 2. Please do not put extended sequences where I walk around as Mary Jane in it, thank you. I think it's pretty obvious at this point that open-world games aren't going anywhere. And at least for me, the fundamental differences between a game that I'll finish and a game that I won't is just the general sense of satisfaction you get from controlling the character. Whether navigating the world is a challenge to overcome in and of itself, or where traveling across the map is just as fun as the destination, the importance of traversal can't be overstated.
Wow, Cam Wing, I can't believe you didn't talk about Florence Henderson and the 9 very special grains of basmati rice.
Well, I haven't played every single game. My notes for this video are very long, and if I had unlimited free time to work on it, this video would probably be over an hour. So for the sake of making something that'll eventually be published at some point, I'm not going to be able to talk about everything I wanted to. I'm already considering a follow-up, but it depends on how well this one is received. If you want to see a part 2, let me know in the comments.